The cold stone of the Acropolis pressed against the women's knees. Their bones ached, but none dared move, not from fear of punishment, but because silence was the only thing they still controlled. Below, Athens burned. The fire didn't crackle like a wild forest blaze. It groaned, deliberate, measured, like the deep breath of a god drawing in before destruction. Thick black smoke poured over the rooftops, swallowing the Parthenon's golden face. The taste of ash clung to every breath, coating their throats like bitterness made solid. The Athenian women huddled together, their fine dresses clinging to soot-streaked skin. Some were the daughters of archons, others priestesses who had once stood proud in white robes, commanding respect with a glance. Now they were all just remaining inventory. They waited for death. They waited for the immortals. And when the bronze doors of the citadel burst open with a crack like thunder, they did not scream. They bowed their heads. But the swords did not fall. The famed immortals, soldiers cloaked in black and gold, their beards waxed, their faces unreadable, did not charge. Instead, they formed a silent wall at the perimeter, encircling the huddled women. Behind them came other men, not warriors but scribes, robes of deep indigo, scrolls tucked under one arm, styluses in hand. Their eyes flicked across the crowd without emotion, no passion, no cruelty. Just the mechanical focus of men doing a job. One of them approached. He walked straight past the crying women, past the elderly priestess whispering a final prayer to a god that had clearly abandoned them. He stopped in front of a girl with golden hair. Maybe 17. Her gown was embroidered with peacocks, expensive thread. Her hands were uncalloused, her posture straight. The scribe looked her over like she was a marble statue on auction. He spoke without raising his voice. "Father." The girl barely whispered, "Eupatrid line." "Lycomedes," the stylist scratched. "Item 78, female. Age estimated 17. High status. Assignment sewer, royal household, no sword. No chains, just an entry." The girl stood. The soldiers didn't drag her. They merely gestured. She walked, head down, toward the exit of the Acropolis, following a silent column of other women already taken. One by one, the others were processed. Not slaughtered, sorted. An older woman, her hands scarred from years at the loom, was inspected, noted, and marked for textile work in Persepolis. A potter's daughter was asked to describe her kiln techniques. A singer from the temple of Demeter was tested. Her voice, her posture, the tone of her dialect. They weren't women anymore. They were skills. One soldier leaned in too close, his gaze lingering too long on a girl's chest. The supervising scribe snapped a command in Old Persian. The soldier was struck, not the girl. He had forgotten the rule. These were no longer spoils. They were state property. From their high vantage point, the women who remained watched the city turn to black rubble, but only after the columns of selected items had been marched down the Acropolis steps. The looting had been done first, not of gold, not of jewels, but of people. The Parthenon's treasures would burn. The statues smashed, the sacred peplos, months in the weaving, ripped apart like rags. The holy olive tree, Athena's gift, felled and salted. This was the show, the performance, for history's sake, for propaganda. But this silent inventory, was the truth. One girl no older than 14 wept not for her home, but because she knew she was next. Her mother's hands had been pressed to her cheeks in the early morning, whispering, "Hide in the storeroom. Don't let them see you." But the scribe saw everything. Another stylist scratched. Item 93, female pottery apprentice. Strong memory, useful. She, too, was taken. The old priestess still knelt beside the altar. No one touched her. She was too old, too worn. She would not be processed. She would be discarded, and she knew it. She kissed the altar stone. "Let the gods see what has become of us," she whispered. Let them finally see, but no divine thunder rolled. Only the hiss of fire and the sound of names being carved into clay, not headstones, receipts. The march began at dusk. The sun bled across the sky like a wounded animal, casting long shadows behind the silent procession descending the Acropolis. The steps once climbed by proud Athenians during sacred festivals, now bore the quiet footsteps of women, bound not in chains, but in documentation. They walked in single file. There were no cries, no chaos, only the measured pace of a procession arranged by empire. Each woman had been tagged, not physically but in clay. A tablet somewhere already contained her name, or the name she was given, her age, her skills, her destination. To the Persians they were accounted for. The guards, immortals, some said they were hand-picked from birth, marched beside them without speaking. Their presence wasn't to coerce. It was to protect the cargo, to protect assets. Not from escape. Where would they run? But from the undisciplined among their own army, drunken conscripts from the Eastern Front, Scythian mercenaries who thought they'd come for plunder. The immortals weren't warriors here. They were handlers. Athens continued to burn behind them. Not all of it. Not yet. Only the unimportant structures. The wooden homes. The outer districts. The real fire, the one for the temples, would come later. The real fire was for the records. To conceal what was taken. To hide the mechanism beneath the smoke. One of the women stumbled, a young girl barely 12, with dark curls matted in soot. A weaver's apprentice. Her name forgotten already, her voice lost among hundreds. An immortal reached out. She flinched, expecting pain, but the soldier didn't strike. He didn't speak. He simply lifted her to her feet and nodded. She kept walking. Behind them a different group moved with more noise. Persian soldiers who'd been denied the loot they expected. Wine barrels smashed in the streets. A goat butchered on a temple step. One young soldier screamed obscenities into the fire, angry not because he'd been denied cruelty, but because the city had been organized before he arrived. There was nothing left for him. In a marble courtyard near the foot of the hill, the scribes established a temporary station, shaded from the fire's glare, cool from the stone. Women were directed to lines separated by age, by status, by skill. The scribes didn't ask names anymore. They asked functions. What did you make? Where did you train? Do you speak Persian? Each answer determined a path. A girl who said she could read both Attic Greek and Old Persian was immediately marked for administration. In Susa, a woman who could sing in multiple modes was noted for the palace choir. A skilled potter was paired with an older man already being held in a different camp, a transfer for workshop collaboration. This was not mercy. It was allocation, and yet some women still hoped. Will we be freed? One whispered to a scribe. Her voice trembled with a faith not yet crushed. The man didn't even look up from his tablet. You are already assigned, he said. You will be fed. You will be paid. Paid? Yes, you are now imperial labor. She turned away, stunned. Not quite a prisoner. Not quite free. A number, a worker. Her language, her culture, repurposed. Another woman, older, fiercely proud, approached her scribe and spat at his feet. You can catalogue my hands, but you will never have my soul. The scribe didn't react. He simply motioned to the guards. Uncooperative. Reassigned to field labor in Elam. She was dragged away, not screaming, not sobbing, just silent. She had gambled on defiance. It had cost her everything but her life. Somewhere behind a burnt colonnade, a child wailed. Left behind. Not yet old enough to weave or serve. Not yet old enough to be useful. Not yet. By nightfall, the first carts began to roll. Oxen pulled the wagons away from the city's edge toward the gathering supply columns along the coast. Athens wasn't conquered by fire. It was packed and loaded, crated, logged, exported. In the hills above, the last priestesses watched. They were too old, too stubborn to be taken. The flames reached them first. They knelt among the ruins, holding each other, chanting prayers to gods who had not intervened. As the smoke swallowed the sky, one priestess whispered, "We were not defeated. We were harvested." The journey eastward began before the city's embers cooled. The women, now processed and filed into their assigned categories, were loaded into covered wagons, rows of them pulled by silent, plodding oxen. The carts bore no markings of chains or cages, yet they reeked of captivity. Each cart was an open cell, its bars replaced by Persian soldiers, and the weight of documentation. No one knew where they were going, only that the roads were smooth and the orders were clear. The scribes walked among them, not with swords but with scrolls. They checked names, checked placements, made quiet corrections with thin styluses dipped in black ink. One woman had been mistakenly listed as a potter. Her hands were soft, a weaver's instead. She was moved to another wagon without explanation. These were not decisions of compassion. They were logistical adjustments. The roads east were wide and maintained, paved not by accident but by imperial design. The Persian Empire did not expand like a beast. It expanded like a machine, each province feeding another. From the plains of Lydia to the gardens of Susa, every path was oiled by human skill, repurposed and rebranded. Now it was Athens' turn to be digested. Inside one wagon, 4 women sat shoulder to shoulder. On a noble girl, Danaë, who had once attended symposia beside philosophers and listened to speeches about freedom and logos, now stared blankly at her hands. They were bruised but clean, useless now, unless trained to pour wine or raise Persian children. Beside her, an older woman muttered invocations to Athena under her breath, eyes closed, refusing to speak in Persian even when addressed. The scribes had marked her as a religious specialist, but there was little use for Hellenic rituals in Susa. Her fate was undecided. She would likely vanish into the darker corridors of the empire. Temples, cult houses, or worse, disappear into silence. The third woman, Kleia, a weaver, whispered stories to the 4th girl, a child no older than 10. "You must remember the patterns," Kleia told her softly, tracing invisible lines in the girl's palm. "Even if they make you weave in their style, don't forget ours." The girl nodded, but her eyes were empty. No one knew how many wagons there were. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Some carried musicians, their instruments confiscated but their value retained. Others carried nurses, cooks, midwives, women whose skills served the body and the household. Each wagon had been optimized. The scribes had done their work with chilling thoroughness, and in the distance, the fire still rose. Athens, once proud, was now little more than a smoldering shell. The temples had finally gone up. The olive groves blackened. What remained of the city's sacred center was now a warning, not to the Greeks, but to anyone who believed culture could be defended by stone and stories. Xerxes had not come for conquest. He had come for extraction. In a command tent at the front of the caravan, a Persian official reviewed the clay tablets delivered to him at dawn. They were fresh, still warm from the kiln. His eyes scanned the entries. Item 201, Danaë, daughter of Xerxes. Age 19, function companion. Status high-born. Transfer to House of Royal Education, Susa. Item 22, Kleia weaver. Peplos rank. Assigned to textile production, Susa looms. Item 203, unnamed child. Probable artisan descent. Monitor and evaluate. There were hundreds more. He sipped pomegranate wine from a silver cup as he read, unmoved by what the Greeks would call a tragedy. To him, this was success, efficiency. The empire did not just conquer, it absorbed. It broke down cultures into skills and reassigned them. The fire behind them was just theater. The real work was being done here, in ink, in silence. Along the road, Persian soldiers halted a small group of stragglers, 3 older women and a limping man with a cane. Unregistered, undocumented, the officer in charge barely paused. Too old. No use, dispose. The guards obeyed. No one in the caravan turned to look. Not out of cruelty, but because they'd already learned, some lives were no longer considered part of the process. Later that night, as the caravan stopped near a riverbank, the women were given small rations, grain cakes, water. No chains, no whips, only procedures. Danaë looked up at the stars, the same constellations she had once studied with her tutor in Athens, but now they hung over a different world, one where she was not a citizen, not a philosopher's daughter. Just item 201, a body with value, a mind to be trained, a womb to be used. The stars faded into dawn as the caravan neared the coast, where Persian ships waited like open mouths, ready to devour their cargo. The sea was calm, eerily calm, as if mocking the turmoil behind them. The waves lapped gently against the hulls of the transport vessels, painted in the subdued colors of the empire. No banners, no horns. This was not a parade of victory. It was a transfer of goods. The women were not forced onto the ships. There were no whips or screams. They were lined up, counted again, their placements double-checked against the clay tablets carried by the scribes. The ledgers did not lie. Everything was exact. Kleia, the weaver, was separated from the girl she'd been caring for. The child was pulled to another line, younger, undeveloped, not yet useful but potentially. A soldier began to move her toward a different ship, one bound not for Susa, but for training in Persepolis. Kleia stepped forward instinctively. "She's mine," she said in broken Persian. A scribe turned. "She is unclaimed." "I taught her," Kleia insisted. "She knows loom work." "She's half-trained already." The scribe frowned, consulted a tablet, scribbled something, and then nodded. "Accepted. Add her to the Susa group. Item 204. Just like that, the girl was reassigned. Her fate rewritten with a few scratches of stylus. On the dock nearby, Danaë stood apart, flanked by two guards, her hair carefully combed and rebraided by order of the scribes. "Maintain status presentation," one had said. The Persian court, even in its captivity, expected its acquisitions to look the part. She had not cried once since leaving Athens, but now, as she watched the ships fill with quiet women, some noble, some common, all stripped of their place, their language, their gods, something inside her cracked. "We're not people to them," she whispered. An older woman beside her shook her head. "No, we're infantry." They boarded at mid-morning. The ships were not slave galleys. They were supply vessels, clean, compartmentalized, quiet. The women were placed in small cabins, 5 to 6 per room. The doors were not locked, but they were watched. Meals were delivered. Instructions were given. Do not speak unless spoken to. Learn the language. Obey the scribes. On the third day at sea, one of the women jumped overboard. She was a musician from Eleusis. Her hands were calloused from lyre strings. She had not spoken since the night the temples burned. In the quiet of the early morning, as the sea shimmered with pink light, she simply stepped off the railing and disappeared. No scream, no flailing, no one tried to save her. The soldiers didn't react. The scribes made a note, item 173, deceased self-termination. Replace with item 214 from backup inventory. That was all. Kleia saw it happen. So did Danaë. Neither spoke of it. The Persian overseers were not cruel, not in the way the Greek stories warned. They did not shout, did not beat, did not mock. Their indifference was colder than cruelty. It made them feel more alone. A week passed. Land emerged on the horizon. Not home. Not anything familiar. This was the empire now. At the docks of Susa, they were disembarked just as efficiently as they had been taken. There were no crowds, no announcements. Just more scribes, more tablets, more reassignment. The process was seamless. Danaë was pulled aside, placed into a smaller group with other high-born captives. Their faces were still clean, their clothing repaired. They were taught basic Persian phrases as they walked. Serve, obey, remember. Kleia and the others were sorted into artisan blocks. They would be housed in dormitories near the royal textile workshops. Assigned schedules. Assigned food. Assigned rest. They would not be chained, but they would not be free. That night Danaë was brought before a court official. She stood in a garden of sculpted trees and running water, the fragrance of jasmine in the air. A world so clean, so calculated, it made her stomach twist. "You are to be educated," the official said through a translator. "You will serve in the house of the king. Your status is known. You are not unknown to us." She clenched her jaw. "I'm not a servant." "You're not," the man agreed without smiling. "You are state property. And in Persia we maintain what we claim." Danaë was led away into the white stone corridors of her new prison. Quiet, rich, perfect. Elsewhere in the city, Kleia was already working, her fingers bleeding onto Persian thread. Not with peace, With discipline, rows of weavers sat cross-legged on polished stone floors, their hands moving in perfect rhythm under the overseer's watchful eyes. The air was thick with the scent of wool, oil, and crushed pomegranate dye. No chatter, no singing, just the clicking of loom weights and the occasional barked command from the scribe monitoring output. Kleia worked near the center. She had been given her own frame, larger than the others. Her test patterns had impressed the scribes. One even muttered something about peplo technique, though he pronounced it badly. Her weaving was not just skilled, it was cultural capital, and the empire knew how to extract that better than anyone. They didn't want slaves, they wanted producers. Each day, Kleia and the others were roused before sunrise. They were fed in silence, flat bread, dates, lentils, then walked to the workshops in orderly lines, the guards not holding whips but scrolls. If a woman slowed, a note was made. If she weaved less cloth than the day before, it went on her tablet record. No pain, just pressure. That was the cruelty of this place. Punishment came in numbers. The child she had fought to keep with her, Elia, was placed in junior training. She was not beaten, not screamed at. She was conditioned. Every word of Greek was frowned upon. Every smile punished with extra chores. Persian tongues only, her trainer whispered in Farsi. You want food? Then use ours. Elia was learning fast. Kleia saw it in the way she started holding her posture like the local girls. Saw it in the soft Persian lullabies that slipped from her lips when she thought no one was listening. Her Athenian self was fading, not with terror, but with time, and Kleia, for all her strength, couldn't stop it. At night, they were not locked in. The doors stayed open, but there was nowhere to go. The compound was surrounded by walls and guards, who were silent but swift. One girl tried to run 3 days ago. She had made it to the outer kitchen before being intercepted. No beatings, just reassignment. She was moved to the dye vats, hot, fume-filled, chemical-rich. She'd come back coughing blood. Her fingers never wove again. In the higher quarters of Susa, Danaë was learning a different kind of obedience. She was taught court manners, shown how to bow, how to walk behind royalty, how to pour wine without being noticed. Persian nobles came through often, men with beards oiled like black rivers, eyes that assessed rather than admired. She was never touched, but she knew it was coming. Not through violence, no. The Persians didn't ravage high-born women. They acquired them, slowly, patiently, with contracts and ceremony. She had already heard whispers. The king's cousin has asked her age. She speaks Persian well. She would bear strong sons, and so each day she was dressed finer, taught more poetry, made to recite verses not in honor of Athena, but Ahura Mazda. She performed. She obeyed. She smiled when asked. Inside she screamed. Once, during a rare moment of solitude, Danaë climbed to the rooftop of her training quarter. From there, she saw the sprawl of Susa, too organized, too clean. The palaces glimmered. The workshops churned. But there, on the far edge, she spotted the textile compound. She could just make out the rows of women walking in and out. A line of wagons passed through the outer gate, bringing fresh labor. New inventory. Somewhere down there was Kleia. Somewhere down there was Athens, in pieces. In thread, in silence. She remembered her father once saying, "If they ever take us, at least we'll die Greeks." But they hadn't died. They had been absorbed. Later that night, she was summoned to a chamber, not by force, by invitation. The man inside wore white robes and heavy rings. A translator stood by his side. "I am Lord Artemesh," he said. "You have been noticed. You are of value." Danaë said nothing. "You will dine with my household tomorrow, not as a slave, as a consort in preparation." A pause. "If you refuse, you will not be punished. You will simply be reassigned, and another will take your place." Danaë bowed her head. She did not cry. There was nothing left to mourn. The dinner was quiet, not the silence of discomfort, the silence of arrangement, of roles pre-agreed upon, of gestures choreographed in advance. Danaë sat on a silken cushion, her back perfectly straight, her face painted in the subtle style of Persian nobility. The pigments were foreign on her skin. The gold-threaded robes clung tightly to her shoulders, reminding her with every breath that she was no longer Athenian. Not in the eyes that now studied her like she was a crafted item finally unwrapped. Lord Artemis did not leer. He didn't need to. He had power, and in this place power did not roar. It whispered. One word and lives changed. One nod and bloodlines were merged, not by passion but policy. He motioned for wine. Danaë poured it silently, her hands steady. Her training was complete. You adapt quickly, he said through the translator, though she could now understand most of his words without help. Danaë answered in Persian, as she'd been taught. The empire does not wait, Artemis smiled. You speak it with elegance. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. Her place at the table said everything. He gestured toward the small harp in the corner of the room. Do you sing, Danaë? The question landed like a stone in her throat. Her mother had taught her to sing before she could walk. Hymns to Athena, lullabies of Athens. But here, I did, she replied carefully. Before, then you shall again, he clapped. A servant placed the harp in her hands. She played. Her fingers found the strings with slow precision. She did not sing in Greek. She sang in Persian, a courtly song about duty and peace. Her voice was soft, melodic, but hollow, like a vase polished to shine, but already empty inside. Artemis watched her, not with lust, but satisfaction. The song was not for pleasure. It was for confirmation. She was ready. That night, she was moved from the training quarters to his estate, not as a wife, not as a lover, not yet. First, she was to be presented formally, catalogued again, now not as item 201, but as Danaë of the House of Artemis, consort class. Even in her new silk robes, she felt like she was wearing shackles. Across the city, Kleia's fingers bled again. The looms had been pushed harder this week. A royal festival was approaching, a grand ceremonial display of Persia's might. All subject peoples were to contribute their finest. That meant the Greek weavers were under scrutiny. Their thread must be flawless, their patterns exact. It was not enough to imitate Persian motifs. The overseers wanted innovation. Kleia's section was ordered to recreate the sacred robe of Athena, but with Persian symbolism woven in. A hybrid, a fusion. She wanted to scream, but the overseer only cared about thread counts. Kleia sat beside her now, nearly as skilled as the women. The girl had changed. Her eyes no longer looked up in fear. They stared straight ahead, focused. She no longer whispered Greek at night. Her dreams spoke in Persian. That frightened Kleia more than any whip ever could. That night, back in the dormitories, she found a charcoal stub and scribbled a small design on the wall behind her cot. The owl of Athena, simple and rough. She stared at it until she fell asleep. The next morning, it had been scrubbed clean. Not by malice, by routine clean walls, clean records, clean minds. In the administrative offices of Susa, the scribes prepared new records. A memorandum was sent to Persepolis. Athens output, 37 active weavers, 9 apprentices, 11 musicians, 2 scribes, 1 noblewoman reassigned to court integration. All units compliant. The empire was pleased. There would be no rebellion, no fires here, no poetry about lost cities or gods abandoned, just the quiet hum of looms, just the soft singing of women in borrowed tongues, just the ledger, ever growing. The season shifted in Susa without ceremony. There were no festivals for autumn, no songs for harvest. Not here. The empire was too vast, its calendars too numerous. Every culture it absorbed brought its own gods, its own dates. The result was something quieter, more practical. The rhythms of empire were not marked by celebration. They were marked by quotas. In the textile compound, Kleia had met every quota. Her hands, once praised in Athens for weaving the ceremonial peplos offered to Athena, now served Persian overseers who didn't even recognize the sacred significance of what she had once created. She no longer protested, no longer spoke Greek unless she was alone. Not because she had accepted, but because she had calculated. Rage was too expensive. Silence was sustainable. Kleia was now formally entered into the roles. The scribes came one morning, handed her a clay tablet with her designation, Artisan Class Junior, assigned to Loom Sector 4. She held it like it was a diploma, proud of it. She smiled at Kleia. Kleia didn't smile back, because in that moment it became clear the child was gone. What stood before her was a product, a thing refitted and polished, and ready to serve the machine that had swallowed them both. Later that day, a new order came down, a special commission. One of the satraps in the eastern provinces was marrying a noble's daughter, and he had requested a gown woven by Athenian hands, not because he honored Greek craft, but because it was fashionable to own what others had failed to protect. Kleia was selected to lead the work. She was given better food, more thread, a private corner of the workshop, everything she needed, except her freedom. She worked through the nights, her fingers twitching in her sleep. The design she wove was flawless, except for a single hidden stitch on the inner lining. A Greek letter, small, inverted, invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. It meant remember. It was all she could offer. In the estate of Artemis, Danaë no longer sang. She no longer needed to. Her role was established. Her presence at dinners, her obedience during ceremonies, her silence during the long walks through the palace gardens, all of it had been recorded, reviewed and approved. She was now part of the household. She had not been touched. Not yet. Artemis was a methodical man. He understood the value of anticipation. He paraded her like a conquest, not yet consumed, a trophy still in its glass box. Danaë had learned the rules. She could speak the language. She knew which nobles to bow to and how deeply. She knew the court poetry, could recite hymns to Ahura Mazda, and had even been assigned a personal scribe to help refine her handwriting in cuneiform. Her Athenian identity was now a costume she wore only in her mind. But one night, as she was walking the outer gardens, she found a familiar face, or what was left of it. A man was sweeping the paths, old, bent, shoulders hunched. His hair had thinned, but the lines of his jaw, the tilt of his nose, it was unmistakable. Her tutor, Philostratos. He had taught her logic, rhetoric, the philosophies of Socrates and Anaxagoras. And now he was a groundskeeper. She stepped forward, but before she could speak he looked up and shook his head, not angrily, just gently, as if to say, "Don't." He returned to sweeping. Danaë didn't say a word. She walked past him and didn't look back, because she understood. Some things, even memory, could be dangerous here. A week later, a cart arrived at the textile compound. It bore a sealed box with royal markings. Inside, 2 garments. One, the commissioned wedding gown, perfect. The other, a robe woven in blue and gold for a court festival. At the bottom of the box, a tablet. It read, "Weaver Class Senior, Kleia. Promotion authorized. Transfer to Royal Workshop Persepolis. Persepolis, the heart of the empire." Kleia was leaving. Susa Elia stood at the gate as she boarded the cart. She looked so proud. "I'll see you soon," Elia said in Persian. Kleia nodded but didn't respond. She didn't have the heart to say what she knew. She would never see Athens again. Nor Elia. Nor her name carved on anything except another clay tablet in some endless hall of records. Still, as the cart rolled away, she smiled for the first time in months, because in the robe she'd left behind for the wedding, she had sewn another hidden stitch. This one read, "Athens lives." Persepolis loomed like a dream made in stone, grand, impossible, inhuman. Its walls did not rise, they declared. Every pillar carved with the stories of 100 conquered peoples. Their faces bowed, their hands full of tribute. Gold grain, horses' silks. And now, Athenian thread. Kleia arrived not through ceremony, but through paperwork. A clerk met her at the base of the gate. He reviewed her tablet, glanced at her hands, then nodded. "Senior weaver. You'll be stationed in the Royal East Wing. Textile Hall 4. He didn't ask her name. He didn't need to. Names didn't matter here. Only titles. Persepolis didn't operate like Susa. There was no illusion of soft cruelty. This was the heart. Here everything was refined, perfected, polished into silence. Every movement was timed, every corridor cleaned before it could even collect dust. It wasn't cold, it was precise. The women in the royal workshops did not speak unless asked. They wove in shifts, side by side, and only the rustle of silk or the clink of bone needles broke the stillness. Kleia's first commission was for a wall tapestry, a massive piece meant for the Hall of Echoes, where the king's advisors gathered to discuss matters of empire. She was instructed to weave scenes of unity, of peace, of order under the great king. She was given dyed threads more beautiful than anything in Athens, silk that shimmered with oil-like color, gold filaments spun so fine they caught fire in the light. It was intoxicating, but as her hands moved, a small piece of her recoiled, because she knew what they were really doing. They were erasing difference, one thread at a time. Far below, in the servants' quarters, a man named Barzan, a former Greek now fully Persian in tongue and dress, took down orders for food delivery. One of the orders was for the estate of Lord Artemis. Danaë, he had heard, was still there. Still untouched, still being prepared for formal union. "She will be married before spring," a cook whispered. Barzan said nothing. He recognized the name. He had once known her father. Now he delivered her meals. That night, as he passed the estate's outer gates, he tucked a small, folded square of linen into the delivery box. On it, a single stitched symbol, the Owl of Athens. Just like the ones the priestesses used to embroider. He didn't know if she'd see it, but he placed it anyway, because even ghosts deserved a message. Inside, Danaë lived like a shadow. She no longer thought of days in terms of freedom or captivity. There were only tasks, lessons, dinners, walks. She smiled when spoken to. She recited poetry when asked. She responded to her new name when called. But when she received the food tray that night and unfolded the linen tucked beneath the figs, something cracked open in her chest. The owl, so small, so imperfect, so hers. She clutched it to her chest like a prayer she didn't remember how to say, and in that moment, she did not feel alone. Weeks later, the court hosted a festival in Persepolis. Ambassadors from every province were invited. Food from 20 regions. Music in 10 languages, gifts piled in pyramids. Among the tapestry unveiled in the Hall of Echoes was Kleia's work. It drew gasps, whispers, praise. Even the king's vizier commented, "This is finer than anything from Babylon." Kleia bowed silently, but hidden in the folds of a tree's shadow, barely a thread out of place, was the letter feed Greek. Subtle, invisible, unless you knew. One of the attendants noticed, but said nothing. He was from Ionia. He understood. Years passed. Danaë never married Artemis. He died during a hunting expedition. She was passed into the court as a widow without a wedding. She lived in a smaller house now, near the women's libraries. They allowed her to teach the younger consorts how to read, how to behave. They called her Lady Danaë, and assumed she was Persian by blood. She didn't correct them, but once a year she sewed a small linen cloth, just one, with an owl and a letter. She left it near the temple of Anahita, hidden beneath the offerings. Sometimes it was gone the next day, sometimes not, but it always meant something. Kleia never saw Athens again, but her tapestries hung in courts across the empire. In Zausa, in Persepolis, even in Bactria, none bore her name, but some bore symbols, Athenian letters, a stylized olive branch, a pattern from the old peplos, like silent markers, like footprints through the sand. She died many years later, her hands stiff, her back bent. A favored artisan of the empire. On her final tapestry, she wove a final message, this time in full Greek, hidden behind the top fold of the curtain. It read, "We were not destroyed. We were stolen. But we remember, and so in the ledgers of the empire they remain, item 201, item 204, item 214, but in thread, in symbol, in secret. They are still Danaë, Kleia, Elia, still Athenian, still unbroken.